Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. Happy post-Thanksgiving hangover.
Happy post-Thanksgiving.
We are here to discuss The Agency. 2 episodes we get. These are dense, especially this first episode, extremely dense. So this is probably going to be a pretty long conversation. Apologies, Sona. But
That's what I'm here for.
But we only get 1 episode from that point on, from week to week. Also here on the podcast, we are now in the last 3 episodes of The Jackal, The Day of the Jackal. Very popular, by the way. The viewership on that keeps going up. For anybody who didn't listen to my most recent episode where I had Black Friday deals, if you do want to watch Day of the Jackal and some of the other things that are available on Peacock, I think it's pretty weak sauce as far as what's available there. But the Day of the Jackal show is very popular and very good, by the way. So you can get that for less than $2. I'm sorry, less than $1 a month. It's a very cheap price now. So maybe it's about $1.50. So $20 for the entire year. Do the math yourself. $20 for the $20.
You have a calculator on your phone.
Just break it out on your own. But if you do pay for the year, for about a week, they have this deal. It's about $20. So pretty cheap. It's basically one movie ticket for a year of TV. And I'm sure Peacock will have other things on there that are worth watching. And of course, they have a lot of reruns and movies. Their first run for all the Universal movies. So, of course, there'll be blockbusters that you want to see there at some point. Pretty good deal, I would say. Although, if it was full price, I would say do not get Peacock, but maybe worth it for what's upcoming. And, of course, any hit movies they have next year. But this is for this show, The Agency, the one we'll be discussing here, is available on Showtime and Paramount Plus, which is also discounted right now, Sona. It's available through Prime channels. You can add channels, discount 70% off, I think. So it's only $2 and change per month if you want to get that subscription. How was your Thanksgiving, Sona? Anything exciting, unexpected happen along the way?
Unexpected is that somehow I have not learned in the last 15 years that the traffic from New York City to New Jersey will be absolute murder, no matter how late in the day you leave. So I remain surprised that it took 2 hours to complete what should be a 45-minute trip. Also, a nice surprise was that the weather was not bad all day. So by the time we finally made it to New Jersey, it had stopped raining and we were able to spend some time outside.
Yeah, we got pretty lucky. Some areas around here got battered by that lake effect, heavy snowfall. Even up just in Vermont, my mother-in-law is visiting from Vermont. They had a few inches up there. We just got a little bit of rain. So in the grand scheme of things, we got off pretty easy.
And how was your Thanksgiving?
It was nice. The turkey came out perfectly. I thought it was going to be overcooked. It actually came out perfectly. We've gotten it figured out. My wife smartly always writes down the times and the size of the turkey and then a little ranking of how juicy it was. And we figured it all out. By the way, everybody out there, this is my technique, which I read, I don't know where, but it works really, really well. And I remember the first time I did it, my other mother-in-law got into a disagreement because I had read somewhere that the way to make sure that the white meat is juicy is you cook the turkey upside down. Pressed down, right.
I have heard that as well.
Basically, all the juices accumulate in the white meat, and then you flip it at the end to brown it. And that has been our technique forever. We've been hosting for at least 7 years now, probably more. And everybody's always complimentary about how the white meat is not dry. So if you haven't done that before, everybody, I do recommend it. You do have to be able to pick up the bird out of the oven about an hour and a half ahead of time and flip it over. So, we have to come up with a technique for that. I just use 2 large forks, but you may need assistance for that. But it does work really, really well. And the meat comes out very juicy. So there's my tip of the day. That's just a teaser for the new cooking podcast I'm starting. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No one wants that podcast. All right. So this is based on a very critically acclaimed French series called The Bureau of Legends. I think that's a translation from French. This is always, if you ever see the 10 best movie series, French series to watch, this is always at the top of the list. And this ran for 3 years. It wrapped up in 2018. So if you have seen these episodes of the show, and we will be spoiling the first 2 episodes, only the first 2 episodes. So do watch them before you listen to this conversation. But if you have check them out, you know that it has a lot to do with what's happening in Ukraine right now, which obviously is not relevant to the original series, which I have not watched, but I've heard great things about. And used to be available on Hulu. The whole entire thing was available on Hulu, all 3 seasons, until very recently. I had actually put it on my watch list so I could catch up with it. Never got around to it. Now it's on AMC Plus. So if you do have AMC Plus, you may want to watch it. I can't say for now if I'm actually going to plan to watch some of this show, but I will probably stop if I feel like there's too much overlap in plot. But I have a feeling it really is not going to have a lot of plot overlap other than like conceptually some of the archetypes of the characters. I don't think the plot beats will be similar. Probably sample it and make sure I don't accidentally spoil anything. But just to let you know that if you are curious about this world that they're building here, there's a critically acclaimed series available on AMC Plus. You may want to wait until this season's over before, just in case there are spoilers, but just letting you know. And this is the first 2 episodes here, and I believe more of the episodes here in this 10-episode season, I think it's going to be, are directed by Joe Wright, who directed Pride and Prejudice, an Academy Award-nominated director for Atonement, maybe his most well-known film. He also made a very good spy thriller, by the way, called Hannah, which I think is very good. But in the last few years, he's kind of fallen off. Although he directed, by the way, one thing I want to mention to you, Sona, you had mentioned to me, oh, maybe I should watch some of Black Mirror. And I'm like, you definitely can just sample individual episodes. I was going to put together like a little playlist of maybe 4 or 5 episodes I think you would like a lot. And the one that Joe Wright directed, which was the premiere when it moved to Netflix at a much bigger budget, when it moved from the BBC to Netflix, that very first episode was directed by Joe Wright, and it's very good and very funny. So that might be top of the list for you to watch if I put that list together for you. Before we get into the plot breakdown, and there's a lot of plot and a lot of characters and a lot of motivations, a lot of questions as well. Just general question for you, Sona. I know you have kind of a mixed opinion on spy shows. By the way, reviews have not been great for this series, but I was really into these first 2 episodes. It's very dark, but it is, kind of what I like. I like this intrigue and the mystery of character itself in these spy shows, kind of what I'm there for. And I thought it worked very well so far. And I know, for example, you really like The Night Agent, which has some shared DNA with what we're seeing here.
In fairness, it's The Night Manager, which is
The Night
not
Manager,
to be confused with The Night Agent.
Yes.
Although I've heard good things about The Night Agent, and I probably would enjoy it.
I do not recommend The Night Agent, but it is it's a trashy version of that. So it is fun to watch. But yeah, I would say The Night Manager is much more, it's a very different feel, basically. That is much closer to what we're seeing here, I think. A more serious version.
Well, I don't have a comparison, but I see the similarity. Yeah.
As I was watching it, I'm like, this might bore her, but she did like The Night Manager. So they has some of that shared feel. So what did you think of these 2 episodes?
I loved it.
Oh, great. I'm so excited.
I thought it was fantastic. Yeah. Can't wait to see more. I am so into it. I am finding it very compelling. I do, have this problem, which we have discussed before, of telling people apart when they, in my mind, like I have some sort of face blindness for people with dark hair. So I do wish maybe there was a little more diversity in the appearances just for my own self. But I think by the end of the 2nd episode, I had it down.
I do not have that in general, especially since I do recognize these characters, but most of them are very famous people. But some of them are just like really well-known character actors. But I will say that there's a particular character. I'll wait till we get there before I mention it. But there was a particular character that I did not know was like when episode 2 begins, basically, I didn't know I was supposed to know that character. Let's just leave it at that. I'm like, and then it was only towards the end of episode 2 that I'm like, oh, it's him. So maybe it wasn't you. I think it was some of the edits that maybe they were giving, or they were not giving us enough information to make that connection, because I didn't get it either. All right, let's kick things off and talk about. I have to say that this starts off on the wrong foot. I do love the song Love is Blindness by U2, the original version. And I like Jack White. I like the White Stripes, but I do not like this cover of this song, which I've heard before. But I mean, it didn't, and it hasn't grated on me before. I don't know why. It just annoyed me a little bit here, and annoyed me even more considering that is like, they hit you in the head with that. This is the theme of the show. I'm like, oh, okay, already. Do you have any opinion of this song at all?
In contrast, I have no recollection of the song that was played in the beginning.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Whatsoever. I guess I already was trying to focus on learning what was going on, because I had that feeling that it was going to be intense. I do understand what you're saying about the theme of love is blindness. So it does seem a little on the nose given that, but I don't have a specific recollection of hearing any music in particular.
Really? Okay. And you didn't catch it like at the end when he's literally saying that? He goes, that's the thing about love. Love is blind.
I guess
while Love is Blindness is playing on the soundtrack. I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me?
No, I did not get that.
That's me. I tune into music all the time, as you know.
I like to think I do, but this one went over my head.
I'll just jump to it right now. I also Shazammed this African psychedelic band, which I'd never heard before. Did you enjoy that when he goes to his apartment later on?
No idea what you're talking about, Victor.
Really? Oh, see, wow, you're not tuning into the music here.
I will pay attention going forward.
For anybody who did hear that song and is curious as to what it is, it's from 1973. It's from a band called Ophagy, which is a bunch of 15-year-olds back in 1973, a psychedelic rock band from somewhere in Africa. I don't know exactly where. And the song is called It's Not Easy. But I love this song, so I actually Shazammed it. That's why I know all that. And I hadn't heard it before. I'm not trying to sound like I know everything about African psychedelic music. I definitely do not. It was just a song that really caught my ear. Anyway, I'm always tuning into soundtrack picks, and I thought this was a good one. Apparently not impressive to Sona, or not memorable to Sona, at least. All right, let's get into the plot itself. So we meet Martian. This is the only way we know this character, by the way, is Martian. I don't know what his real name is, but
right.
You go by they basically address him as Martian, which I think very funny. They don't even use a second name, like when the doctor shows up later on, the psychologist.
Right.
Henry calls him Martian. I'm like, you never use a real name? Like, it's pretty funny. Although other people go by their names also, like Coyote and stuff like that. So it might be that you just go by your cover name. Maybe that's the other thing. Maybe the field agents themselves don't use their real names, because obviously, like, Henry goes by his own name and Dr. Blake goes by her own name. But maybe the agents do not address each other as by name. That's possible. So they get used to not using their actual names. I'm just guessing here. So he's being debriefed. He's just been pulled out of Ethiopia after 6 years. He doesn't know why he's been pulled out. He actually is very curious about this. And part of the reason he's so curious about this is because he's gotten into a pretty hot relationship with Samaya Zahir, right, is her name. This character who's played by Jodie Turner-Smith. This is the third time we've seen her just this season. She was in The Acolyte. She was in Bad Monkey, and now here she is again.
She's working a lot. Yeah.
Very busy. She had to get divorced so that she could do all this work.
Yeah, I mean, she is so striking. One thing that struck me as I was watching her, because she is a very compelling person to watch, I think, is, wow, I have no idea what happened between her and Joshua Jackson, but it feels like his loss. I don't know.
Later on, there are some agents who go by Grandma and Grandpa, by the way, that are watching in the car, and they're trying to guess who he might be hooking up with that night. And she comes out, and they're like, out of his league. I don't know if anybody's out of Michael Fassbender's league, by the way, although he looks very haggard here, I have to say.
I'm not a big Fassbender follower, so I haven't seen him in much. Yeah, so I have no idea what else Michael Fassbender has been in then.
He hasn't been in like blockbusters and things like that, so you may not know him from, he's not as mainstream.
He also
very well respected. He was in 12 Years a Slave, if you ever saw that. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He was like the evil, slave owner.
Huh. We're both a little bit off. Let's edit this so we seem more knowledgeable than we are.
I'll clean that up.
Yeah. But no, I don't watch slavery movies generally because I find it too upsetting.
Understandable.
So I have no clue who Michael Fassbender is what this comes down to.
What do you think of him here, though, since you haven't really seen him before?
Great. Very, very interesting to watch. Like, I want to see more of him. I actually did feel, and maybe we're off kilter today. Maybe this is more of my off kilter perspective, because this show somewhat reminded me of Homeland. Not really. I felt there was something similar to him and the character of Brody in their appearance. Not that you would ever mistake one for the other, but there was something reminiscent to me.
They're both British, although I think he might be Irish. I'm pretty sure he's Irish.
Hair color is similar. And, I don't know, just something about the way this character acts was similar to me, to the way Brody acted.
Yeah, Fassbender has a real intensity. Oh, something we talked about here on the podcast, which I'm pretty sure you didn't see, but last year there was a film called The Killer. My God, David Fincher. I was about to forget his name too. That David Fincher made for Netflix, and Fassbender starred in that as well. So if you want to see him as a hitman, which really feels a lot like this character, by the way, who also lives by a code. And so if anybody hasn't seen that, definitely check it out. It's just a movie, not a series, but definitely worth checking out.
while I have no familiarity with him, I liked him in this and I found him really interesting to watch.
We see that he's being debriefed by his handler, who's Naomi here, played by Catherine Waterston. By the way, Sona, you definitely have not seen this because you don't watch that many movies, and you definitely don't watch the Alien movies. But Alien Covenant, that Michael Fassbender played a robot called David, or android actually, in Prometheus and then in Alien Covenant, those two films that Ridley Scott made, within the past 10 years. And in that, he has this very strange relationship with the Catherine Waterston character in that movie, in the Covenant, which I won't, spoil here. But it's just interesting that he's very robotic, but he has an agenda, which is the whole kind of subtext to that movie. You'd have to see it to, once again, I'm not going to spoil it here, but very funny to see them interacting here and being like, this is weird. Like they must have thought about that when they cast these people here because there's some weird echoes of their interaction. So I can't help but overlay that on there, but I don't think it's going to pay off in any way. It's not accidental that these two people who were in this movie like maybe 6 years ago are now in this series together, and that they have these one-on-one interactions that almost echo some of the conversations from that movie. Anyway, very weird. I'm pretty sure they've probably cast accordingly, but I don't know if it's going to pay off yet. I'll put a pin in that, and if it pays off in some way, I'll bring it up again.
I will say I found very humorous the exchange between him and his handler about the breakup.
Yes.
Where he's saying, oh, she was devastated, the crying, the screaming. Yes. And then you see her saying, I guess we knew this day would come. Okay.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you about. My follow-up question to you is, he doesn't do anything unintentionally here. So why do you think that he used that cover story saying like, oh, she was devastated, the usual blah, blah, blah. She said blah, blah. I said blah, blah. And then, she says, I never want to see you again. Exactly like you said. And then we see that she's like, well, had to come to an end anyway. Why do you think he would choose to frame it that way? Is it just because he doesn't want to talk about it and it just gets him out of the conversation? Or do you think he's worried that he obviously does have feelings for this woman and he doesn't want to show that in some way?
I think it was the latter, because then later on, and I can't remember if it's this episode or the next one, where the handler says, well, there's two things, right? You need to make sure she is who she says she is. Yeah. And you need to tell me if you fall in love, because these are the two really bad things that can happen if you decide to pursue a relationship. I thought, maybe a little bit of both, right? Because we see by the end that he's wondering whether she is who she says she is. It's clear that he's very much in love with her. So I guess I thought he was one of those things where he felt like he wasn't ready to share it because he wanted to see what was going to develop. So he kind of just created a cover story, I felt.
That's what's funny about it, though, because it's like nobody's falling for this. Like every time he talks to anybody, they're like, is this about the girl? Is this about the girl? I mean, it literally is every conversation he has in this episode, every time he talks to somebody. Like when he's talking to that agent that he seems to have a lot of negativity towards. By the way, let me reference the title of this episode. It's called The Bends, because it's when you're pulled out of the water too quickly. And of course, that's what he's talking about. Like, why did you pull me out so quickly? And, they warn him that you might get the bends as part of the experience of this. Of course, the guy mentions to him exactly that. He goes, is this about the girl? And he says, it's not about the girl, but Henry says to him, like, was it the girl? Like, it's like everybody knows. So also funny, in the debriefing, we see a little flashback to an earlier debriefing with him and Naomi. And he basically announces that he's with this woman. So I'm just letting you know. And she goes, how long? And he says 24 hours. I'm like, I don't know if I just hooked up for the first time. I'm going to tell my handler about it. I don't think it's that important. But did he fall for her immediately?
I missed that. But I will say, I think all of it is a little unusual for a middle-aged man with a teenage daughter. They reference her mother. That was apparently, some sort of long-term relationship. It seems to me kind of strange to treat a middle-aged man like a infatuated teenager, but it's warranted. I mean, I guess it makes sense.
I think you have to do that. I've been rewatching Severance and really enjoying it, by the way, so I really highly recommend. Enjoying it a lot more the second time around. As I'm watching it and I kind of know how the plot's going to play out, I'm paying attention to the character interactions. And I really just like to stew in the idea of like, wow, like what would it be to be in this circumstance, for example, right? And why would you choose to be in this circumstance? And this show, I also really liked it. I prompted you for your opinion at the beginning, because I really like to think about making this decision and why would you make this decision? And to your point, you're so much a lone wolf. So if you do think you can have this reprieve of actually being in a relationship with a real person, there must be a real allure to that. But of course, that makes you very weak, because that's obviously a way where someone can manipulate through that. And of course, that's the question here. This is truly like a film noir in many ways, where she operates as the femme fatale in both cases, because traditionally in the film noir, the femme fatale is either someone that is your downfall because you're trying to rescue them. They're like the innocent, or it's the femme fatale is your downfall because they are playing you the whole entire time. And then, of course, oftentimes it's you expect one and you get the other. Either way, it's bad for the protagonist. So if that's the case, we might be seeing the setup for his own downfall here.
Yeah. And they also get into that. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but towards the end of the second episode, with the two women talking before the one goes on her assignment about what it means to be on this assignment and take on a new identity and compromise.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Being the person that you really are. So that definitely, I think, is a theme here.
Yeah, those final moments of episode 2 are terrific. Not only when you see Daniela,
Mm-hmm.
but also how that parallels, and we see it multiple times here. There's definitely a paralleling of her and Martian, and it's almost like we're seeing him now at the end of a mission and her just starting,
Mm-hmm.
but they're somehow symbiotic there. Like she's at the beginning of the journey and she's just so green and ready to go despite all the danger and complications that are to come. And then it's paralleled very much so with him, of course, like now very cynical and maybe destroyed by this long mission he's been on. Oh, and I want to get into like Coyote in Belarus, this hilarious sequence and what that might mean, by the way, because there might be layers to that as well. Before we get that, we see he's, been pulled out of his current circumstance. This is Martian, as they call him. He is in some safe house. Grandma and grandpa, these two agents that are always together, pick him up. They drive him into London. He is, confused. They, like, aren't we supposed to turn there? He's like, oh, you've been in the field for a long time. So apparently there's a new in-between space. We don't even know how long they kept him in this safe house. He seems to have been there for a while. I like the rules of these spy shows, by the way. I like that there's always some idea of like the airlock, which is, I guess, some parking garage where you always transport through there. I guess it's a way where they can keep track of you. And then there's also this idea that, you don't know if you're being followed, because if you were made and now you're in your new identity, you have to make sure that no one's ever following you. So there's a whole rule that wherever you go, if you're ever driving yourself or on 2 wheels or 4 wheels, so if you're ever transporting yourself anywhere, you have to go to public transportation, which I never really thought about. They also do this in Slow Horses, another recommendation. I never thought about that, but of course that makes sense, right? If someone's following you in a car and you jump onto a bus, it's not convenient for them to like pull over, jump onto a bus, right? So it's like a much easier way to see if you're being followed if you have to always break your routine. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But he's like getting the lay of the land. He's got to be under observation to make sure he's okay, to make sure he's depressurizing, right? This is the airlock. So he needs to make sure he's okay. They need to keep an eye on him. They are, right? They're literally have someone positioned in front of his apartment building. They have his apartment building bugged, right? He like does that. That's when he's playing the African music I mentioned before.
Yes, so many bugs.
There's bugs everywhere. He can't dispose of them, of course. He does actually dispose of them later, but initially he leaves them where they are because he doesn't want to raise any alarms. But of course, he has to know that they're there, so he knows what to avoid potentially. What do you think about this apartment, right? It's right in downtown London. It's a little bit far from the river, but you can almost see it, but pretty good spot from where right? Not a bad pad that he gets to.
Yeah, with a terrace too, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is very gray, though. By the way, London is gray, and this
gray
series itself is shot very gray. It is interesting when you think about the color palette, the grayness of his contemporary life. Everything is gray. Ukraine shots as well. The only streaming, beautiful, golden sunlight we see is in his flashbacks to his relationship back in Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that does tell you something, that he has warmth in his memories, but maybe that is, obviously where his heart still is. We don't know the details. Did we get any details of what his mission was out there? Did you pick up on anything?
Not that I recall.
Yeah, we don't even know what the goal was. There was, we do see pretty soon thereafter, a bombing that takes place in Ethiopia at the university. Mm-hmm. So it makes it feel like that was somehow tangentially related, but he never explains what he was doing out there. Then, of course, he gets to the office. Speaking of that, he's distracted constantly by the news of the bombing, but we do see him and gets to interact with his coworkers. He meets with Henry, which is played by Jeffrey Wright. Always happy to see Jeffrey Wright, such a great performer. And if anyone hasn't seen this, Academy Award nominated last year, he was for Best Actor, and the film American Fiction, very funny. Do check that out.
Yes, I saw that. Yes, very good.
Really excellent. Very different than the book it's adapting, but still streamlines it to its core. But it's a very funny film, and it's available on Amazon Prime right now, so easily available to everybody. And of course, we see Richard Gere, who played Jackal, by the way, or I'm sorry, he played the investigator who's pursuing the Jackal in the terrible 1990s version of Jackal. It's just called Jackal, but the Day of the Jackal adaptation, speaking of coverage currently. But Sona, my question for you, as soon as I saw Richard Gere is 75 years old. So now we have Richard Gere.
I know, I thought about the same thing.
Ted Danson, Kevin Kline, or you know what I threw into the mix here, Sona? As I was taking these notes, I'm like, I have to throw in the mix here Liam Neeson, because I know you have a thing for Liam Neeson.
It is so funny you said that, because once I finished The Agency, it defaulted to whatever channel, I don't know, I guess some variety of Showtime, and Taken came on, which is one of my guilty pleasure movies that I will always watch whenever it's on. So I'm actually looking at Liam Neeson on mute right now. But so actually what occurred to me when I saw Richard Gere is, wow, this is a fantastic time for older,
really is, right?
male actors. Where are the older female actors? I wondered.
I know it's tough. I know. I agree.
And I mean, at this point, it's more than a coincidence. And I started, wondering, well, where are all their contemporaries? And I haven't done a deep dive into that, but maybe it's ahead of me. Regardless, I think they all look great. Happy to see them still working, especially in an industry that values youth. It's fantastic that they're finding roles. Just wonder what's happened to their counterparts.
I completely agree. And it's unfortunate. It seems that things have changed a little bit, but very little recently, in the fact that, exactly to your point, that traditionally there's a lot of famous films where the older man is dating, hooking up with a much younger woman.
Yes.
And there really is no role at all for an older woman, unless it is like literally those type of Calendar Girls or one of those type of movies.
The age is part of the plot.
Exactly. Yeah. They're catering to, women in that age group, because there really is no way to just integrate it into the plot. Although you do see it, like, you see like Margot Martindale, she's not in her 70s, but she is older. And you see her, she'll play like a villain. She'll play a comedic role.
She's fantastic.
She's in Cocaine Bear. she'll show up in anything. To your point, there are few actresses. Obviously, you have
Meryl Streep.
Sure. Of course, who's like a superstar in her later in age and has continued to be. But that's one person, right? You really don't see just people just popping up and having a show made around them. Or more importantly, like a show like this, where Richard Gere's not even the primary character. He's just like a character, and they just pop up, like Kevin Kline showed up in that series as well. That just doesn't happen for women, but hopefully we'll see more of it as time goes by.
Let's hope.
Right.
We do see, and I don't know how old she is, the psychologist in the second episode is at least older. Absolutely. And I remember her very fondly from her days on Frasier.
From Frasier, yeah. I was going to shout her out as well when we got around to her. But yeah, she is...
I keep skipping ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to mention her as well. Yeah, so Richard Gere is playing Bosco. He's the head guy. Doesn't really want to hear from the underlings, by the way. That might be a blind spot for him. Speaking of the underlings, we have the character Owen, who's played by John Magaro, who's in so many things all of a sudden. I remember him very fondly he's the husband in Past Lives, which I thought was excellent. Of course, I highly recommend it.
Oh, sure. My husband actually watched some of this with me, and he was trying to place him as well, and I was no help.
He's been in, I can't even pull up his IMDb right now, but he's been in so many things recently. But like I said, I'll just shout out Past Lives, which I loved. And I know you didn't like it as much as I did, but love that. And he was really good in that. Everybody, the three leads are all fantastic in that film. Oh, and then there's this character, Frank, who only makes it through episode 1, but is pretty relevant here. He trained the Coyote. Here's a few questions I have for you here. Well, hold on a second. Let me take a step back here. Who's Coyote? So this is hilarious. We see this guy in Belarus, who's one of their agents, turns out to be this character, Coyote, who's at a club, totally drunk, and he gets into, this is, what do you think is going on here? He plows into another car, then goes on this high-speed chase all over the city. It's very cool the way this is shot, by the way. You see most of it is through surveillance cameras and traffic cameras and things like that. And it's very cool that the way that they convey this information. And eventually, like, crashes into like a police car. He takes the door off a police car, and then he gets tasered and arrested in Belarus. And then he kind of disappears at some point. And the real instigating factor for this whole series is like, where did he go? Who's actually had their cover blown? Because he knows a little too much. My question to you, even before we get into like how he was trained and his issues with alcohol, etc., do you think this was accidental? This is an agent that's even half proficient for him to plow into the other car, which maybe was an accident, or maybe he's trying to attract attention, or maybe he's trying to get arrested even, but then to like make such a spectacle of himself, like this can't be accidental, right?
Well, okay, now I'm thinking about this while we're talking. We know for sure he was drunk.
Yes, I think he definitely was drunk.
Okay, so to me, I went to the part of this where we see the clip of the training
Yes.
of being interrogated while intoxicated and him saying, if I'm drunk, it's because somebody made me drunk because I am sober.
Right.
So I assumed it was something like that he had been somehow drugged or given alcohol against his consent in some way.
Right.
And that he was legitimately drunk. But you make a good point. He probably was trying to call attention to the fact that something was going very wrong.
Right. That's what I assumed, because going exactly that, he specifically says, if you see me drunk at any time, you're not going to train me to be questioned while I'm drunk. This is where Frank is involved, because he's reviewing his training session with him. And it turns out that maybe this is why Frank destroys the tape, which is another question I have for you, is what's his agenda? Because he destroys the tape, even though everybody pretty much finds out what happens, he gets fired anyway. So it wasn't really useful. They're just firing him for incompetence. But there's a very important piece of information, like you mentioned, that he says, if you see me drunk, someone has forced me to be drunk and my cover is blown. So very important information to know, right? This is context that they do not have at this moment, the other agents, other than Frank. And Frank destroyed that information. And then also, exactly like you mentioned, is, we've all been drunk before. Even if you're really drunk and you accidentally plow into someone's car or something, you can kind of try to hold it together. So it really seemed like maybe he was in danger and he's like intentionally trying to get arrested or trying to make such a massive spectacle of himself that no one like at Langley level or MI6 level here, which we should talk about that. This is the CIA operating in London, by the way. So you have Michael Fassbender with an American accent, which is funny, but his daughter has an English accent. Another funny detail here, but he's supposed to be an American.
Yes, I was surprised by that as well. And then I thought, well, I guess if she was raised in London, she picked up a British accent.
And I guess the wife, I assume, is British, right? So
yeah.
She lives with the wife, so that would make sense.
That's the assumption, yeah.
Although we have not met the mother. Yeah, so Frank does this cover up, a very important piece of information, destroys the tape intentionally to cover his own ass, but gets fired and doesn't even warn them that, look, you guys probably have to assume that his cover's been blown. That's a very important piece of information that they are guessing, like they have that as one of their theories, and Frank is covering it up. So that's really bad. It's a good thing that he's been fired.
Well, I thought also that this seems like the type of thing that, in my mind, would be disqualifying for being in this position.
Right. Yes.
Like, I don't think this is the line of work for you. Maybe an office job with the CIA. If your sobriety is, at risk, I don't think you should be, right? Like, I mean, this is one of those things where you can't get a security clearance if you owe people money. There's 1,000 reasons, but it used to be you couldn't get a security clearance if you were gay because the risk of somebody blackmailing you to disclose that to, maybe you have a wife, but you behind her back are having affairs. They are so particular about which people can be put into these risky situations. It seems to me that this would disqualify you from having the job at all. Yeah,
absolutely. These could be worldwide consequences. Not always, but even minor things could, if nothing, just embarrass the organization.
Exactly.
So if you've been compromised by the enemy, not that alcoholism, you can imagine if you're an agent in the US and you're like saying like, well, I'm trying to stay clean and sober, and not for nothing, but you think about the culture of drinking in Russia. And, like they're literally saying this is standard for training because you're going to have to get drunk with these people at some point And he's like saying like, no, I can't do this. And it's funny that Frank gets like upset later when Henry calls him out on this and says, this is a disease. He doesn't have control over it. But to your point, Henry's like, but yeah, that he shouldn't be an agent. Like that's a problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that whole thing is very complicated. But worse is not that this is the case, but that Frank is covering it up to cover his own ass. This could have really negative consequences. Like they're talking about potential nuclear consequences here. So long story short is I'm glad they fired Frank because Frank does not seem reliable.
Poor judgment. Yes.
But warns them, and he might be right also, warns them that Martian can't be trusted, which may be true.
Yes.
Or maybe he sees in Martian the same weakness that he has because he thinks that he's identified this weakness in Martian with this woman. Maybe he's right to warn him, but man, Frank can't be throwing any, this guy can't throw any rocks. You know what I mean? He lives in a glass house.
Yes, for sure.
He covers himself up saying that the tape is gone. The original is corrupted. Like this is a really ugly, this is like such a minor point in the plot, but for me is like really egregious. So yeah, everybody is freaking out about Coyote. How much does he know? It's interesting here. I don't know why. I only caught this on the rewatch, or I should say like on the previously on when I saw episode 2, when they're talking about the possible missions that could be affected. He hears the name Felix. Henry doesn't know what Felix is, but it somehow is big enough that it piques his interest. And he leaks that name out to his brother-in-law by the end of the episode. Have you ever heard of this idea of the domino theory, the new domino theory? Who is this? Dominic... What's his?
We continue to misidentify people.
Dominic West. I'm using I'm using the Control F in my notes because I'm like, this is better than just scrolling through all these words. Dominic West.
And again, with an American accent.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, British, and he's doing an American accent. He didn't have a British accent when he did The Affair, right?
No, I'm pretty sure it was American. Yeah.
Well, that's why he's just American now at this point. Everybody assumes
The Wire, The Affair, and now this. Yeah,
exactly. But you haven't heard this, right? The 3 domino theory?
No, I had never heard that.
Maybe Felix is this code word, but this might be one of the biggest dominoes, supposedly, that could fall. Everybody's on high alert. Owen, we see here again, is reviewing all of his debriefs with Coyote. He's looking for any kind of warning signs. So he also meets up with Blair, who was the previous handler, and they kind of tag team on managing this Coyote situation. She becomes even more prevalent in episode 2. Everybody's keeping secrets here, by the way. Another important point. Martian is destroying a note that he finds from Sammy among his personal effects when he's going back to the office to destroy them all. Frank, of course, has damaged those videos to hide something in there. Maybe it's just his own alcoholism, but maybe there's something more there that we haven't seen. Oh, and then, of course, we also see when he goes to dispose of all his identity and things like that, they go like, oh, one of your email accounts is still active. And he goes in there and he finds an email from her specifically and destroys it before they have them wipe it all out. Is there more to this? Or do you think it's just purely that he has lied, that he has a serious relationship with her? And that obviously, like you said, anything that can compromise you, that's obviously something that could be reflected on him.
The sense I get is that he's conflicted himself because he knows this isn't supposed to be something he's doing, and he's ended the relationship with her, and he needs to move forward. But at the same time, he's in love with her. It's like him going through the motions of doing what he's supposed to be doing. But as we see, in the end, he can't bring himself to totally separate from her.
Yeah, he also has, once again, during that kind of regroup or that depressurization with the team members, it's interesting to see him interact with his handler, Naomi, because a couple of things. One is she is like, can we touch? Because I'm so used to seeing you on TV. Mm-hmm. But she seems a little coy with him, that she has a weird expression on her face when he hugs her. Do you think it's because maybe she knows too much, or do you think that maybe she has feelings for him? Because I felt a little tension between them. Did you pick up on that at all?
Definitely some awkwardness, I thought, but
Yes.
I wasn't sure what was behind it.
Same. I really can't put my finger on it there. At first, I thought it was sexual tension, but then when she hugs him and she has this awkward look on her face, I couldn't place it. Maybe just because she knows so much about him, I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, same.
But there'll definitely be more in regards to that, I'm sure. Oh, this is where he finds out about that bombing. I mentioned that earlier. And he's very distracted by this. But any kind of question that he's just making some play with Sammy, because it's hard to get a read on him intentionally. He's always so guarded. But we see him have like a panic attack after he leaves. These are real emotions. And he's really terrified that she might have been injured in this bombing, that maybe she might have been targeted in some way.
And I think it, goes to the depth of what he's feeling for her, that he can't just move on in a matter of fact way. He needs to know that she's okay.
Right. And then he breaks protocol again later on. He then is back in his apartment. His daughter comes to visit. Poppy is her name. I love this scene, by the way. I liked the awkwardness between them, how they're both very guarded. He's obviously trying to reach out to her in some way. They have this very dry, funny thing they do, which apparently is like shtick that they've been doing for many years, but he has barely seen her. First of all, he's been gone for 6 years. And then it seems like she visited him in Istanbul at some point, because he mentioned Istanbul and how she was followed when she was there and how she will be followed now that he's back. All these things are protocols she's used to. She has given her boyfriend a code name, which I think is very funny, to hide it. So he can't like do background checks on him, I assume. They're going on vacation to Portugal, which is beautiful. I mean, Brits love to visit Portugal because it's so great there and it's so sunny in Portugal, usually anyway.
Everybody loves to visit Portugal lately, from what I've heard.
Of course. Try to get that funding from Apple TV and from the Portugal Travel Bureau. They're on the podcast. And I do like the way he describes his job. She's like, did you have to assassinate anybody? Do you have to do this or that? And he goes, no, his job is to get information from people. And she goes, so you're like beating people up, which he does do in this episode, by the way. He says, no, that's not the best way to get information from people under duress. You actually have to become their friends. Or she says friends, you have to become friends with them. And he says they're acquaintances, which of course we know for a fact that he has now violated multiple aspects of this. But I do like the fact that really is what the job is, right? I'm sure he has not been, it's not James Bond. He has not been assassinating people in Ethiopia. He's been doing the legwork, maybe getting people assassinated in Ethiopia, but he's not doing that work. He's just doing the discovery.
Yeah. And it actually kind of reminded me of The Americans a little bit that all of this spy work can come together to be something very big and dramatic, but there's lots of pieces of it that are just more administrative in nature.
Of course.
And you'd see in The Americans, like literally the assignment was like, pick up an envelope here and drop it off there.
Right.
And I mean, that's necessary too. So
speaking of Margot Martindale, by the way.
Yes.
But of course, people do often die, and there often are stakes. But I do think that that's interesting that you also see elements like maybe Frank, I'm trying to find something more nefarious in Frank's actions. He's just trying to cover his ass so he doesn't get fired, which is what everybody does 90% of the time in their own jobs. And in this particular case, there could be catastrophic consequences.
Right.
But maybe most people just work like this is a 9 to 5.
Yeah, maybe.
There's many risks involved there. And yeah, I really like this because I like the emotion here. Martian rarely shows emotion here in this show in general. And I think it's something Fassbender does really well is to have that intense look, but then feel the emotion coming off of him. And there's that moment when she's by the elevator and she does finally admit that I did miss you. I'm glad you're back. And then he kind of goes leaning in for the hug, but then of course the elevator door closes at that moment. The emotions just felt very real for me there.
Yeah.
I really liked it. And both performers just doing a terrific job. This young actress in the room with Michael Fassbender one-on-one and doing a great job. So kudos to her.
Agree.
And then speaking of this young woman and Martian and maybe the origin of his journey on this long time away, we counterpoint that with Daniela, right? So we're kind of introduced to this new character. We think that she might actually just be this Iranian woman, but it's actually just her being practice interrogated. She needs to learn gutter
Farsi,
yes. She has to learn street Farsi because she doesn't understand some of the things that this person is saying. She actually starts laughing in the middle of the interrogation. So obviously she has a little more work to do, but she's very intense. She's very dead set on this. And I actually took a note here that I wanted to pick your brain on. Like, would you take this job? Like, what is the appeal doing this job?
Of doing which specific job?
Of being an agent and putting yourself into, I mean, of her specifically, of all these people, but imagine being this young woman and she is willing to erase her personality and put her life on the line, especially think about her mission that go into Iran. What do you think is her motivation? Like, who would take this job, basically?
Someone with a personality disorder, I would assume.
Right. But then aren't we, I mean, maybe that's the point of this show. Are we supposed to think that these people are all mentally ill and we're putting our national well-being on the line? And these are the people who are frontline fighters? Like, Do we
I
trust
think
these people? Can we trust these people?
that's possible. I also think maybe this exists and they're not showing it, or maybe for the sake of the story, they're not showing it. But I think many of the people who are in these really intense positions did start off by being the person who takes an envelope from one place and drops it in
Right.
another place,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And then like it slowly intensifies until you get to the point that you are doing life and death things directly, not 10 steps removed from life and death. So I could see it more in that context, that you just agree to do something a little bit more serious and a little bit more serious until all of a sudden you're holding democracy in your hands. So I think that is realistically probably the way it happens, more so than what we see here, where it's like, learn the language fast because we're dropping you in Iran.
Yeah. She's going in the deep end, as he says at one point. And Martian says, is there a shallow end? Well, which is true, right? To some extent. You imagine this is obviously like life and death potentially for her. Although when we find out more about her actual cover, she probably has a little bit more protection. They're just preparing her for the worst case scenario. But, to the idea of like, is there a shallow end? Going back to the idea of the Americans, it doesn't have to be life and death every single day.
Right.
It's just the fact that just living a lie constantly is the grind of that on you, right? It's not like you have to have a facade for a minute, something that Martian drives home in episode 2. It's not even for a short period of time, which is distressing enough. It's having to do this as your true identity for years at a time. And how,
for sure,
is that even possible, right? And maybe that's the question we see here. Maybe they're all breaking protocol constantly and just trying to cover their own asses throughout. So then, speaking about these parallel characters, we see Daniela again. This is, by the way, a ruse, kind of, I think, that Henry's saying. Once again, we don't even know the details of this yet. Someone pulled him out. And when he questions Henry, why, who made this decision? Why was I pulled out? Henry tells him, it was just that you've been undercover for a long time. Once again, I'm not sure that's true. Maybe they needed him for another mission, whatever. But then he diverts that questioning by saying, well, while you're here, one thing you can help me do is train this trainee. And of course the last time we talked on the podcast, we were talking about a man on the inside. And we have the same scene here again, right? Where she shows up at the restaurant.
That's true.
She does much better, by the way, than
Ted Danson.
She obviously knows her job a little bit better than Ted Danson did, that she needs to keep her eyes open and looking all the time. So she did correctly scope these people out. But her mission for the day is to approach these two guys and get their first name, their last name, and their contact information. And she flirts with them and was able to get that information pretty easily. And then he abandons her there. And he goes, now that guy is going to come hit on you. And now you got to get out of this situation. And she goes, well, I made my decisions assuming that you were going to be my exit.
Yeah.
And he says, never trust the op, only trust yourself. Which on the one hand, this is another interesting point here on the show, I think, that it seems like that makes sense from the point of view of protecting yourself, sure. But going back to the idea of like, is this actually how we want to run our spy agencies and political systems? If you never trust the people you're working with and you're only looking out for yourself, I don't know if this is going to end well.
Right.
And I think there's a little commentary there. So that night, Martian is in his apartment. He knows he's being watched. He's multiple times spotted this blue car, this agent sitting in the car watching his building, and he heads out for milk, quote unquote. He points out, he does this multiple times. He knows he's being tailed. He says, hey, anything I could get for you? And the agent, she says, well, I need some ketchup for my fries. So he buys some ketchup and a little bit of milk. But of course, he actually wants to get a burner phone. And the cutest detail I thought here was when he gets back home and he puts the milk bottle right next to two identical milk bottles. And then he turns them so they all face exactly the same way. So I'm like, he's OCD and he's using this as a ruse to leave like basically every single night because it hasn't been back that long for him to need so much milk. And of course, he gets the burner phone because he wants to call Sammy, and he does. He has a shower running because he knows he's being listened to. And dun, dun, dun. Oh, you're still in London? I'm still in London. Oh, what an interesting coincidence. And then I guess he meets with Frank, calls him out on their, they obviously seem to have a very bad relationship, which comes to a head very quickly, very soon, I should say. And then we get to the very end, and Bosky, who is the Richard Gere character, wants to know what is going on. They're telling him, well, these are the possible scenarios. We have a feeling that it's probably not just he got drunk, and we think there's something else going on there. Either he's trying to, like I mentioned before, raise some kind of flare, telling them that his cover's been blown, or maybe a double agent potentially, and he basically got himself arrested intentionally for the Russians to extract them. And they are worried about that, considering that he has disappeared. They apparently had another agent nearby who, I don't know if you have a theory on this one, by the way. So another agent nearby intentionally got arrested to get into the building. And then he reports back that he searched the entire building, even the basement floor, to see if anyone's being interrogated. And my question is this agent, like, let's say he got into a fight at a bar drunk and gets arrested. How did he now infiltrate the entire building? I don't know what he did there, but
they're that good at their jobs.
Apparently, right? He must have, like, you can't just start killing people in the building. That would be very suspicious, right? So he had to be a little more subtle about it. But anyway, somehow he saw the entire inside of the building, and they were unable to find this guy. So they don't know how anybody got in or out of there. They didn't see anything suspicious. But Coyote is missing, and they're trying to get to the bottom of it. And of course, they're all panicking because he may know. This is where Dominic West brings up the whole 3-domino theory, the new domino theory. And Bosco, of course, tells him this is just a local problem as far as we know, but he is worried that it is bigger than he originally thought as well. They fire Frank mostly because during this interrogation process, when he says, well, this interview disappeared and he didn't drink, I didn't train him for that. And Martian turns on those deadly, Michael Fassbender deadly stare. And he's just like, why didn't you tell us this? And of course, that was really the beginning of the end. And this is also as when Frank is leaving, where he warns Henry, keep an eye on him. There's something wrong with him. And of course, he'd called him out earlier about this girlfriend. So I think he sees that weakness there. That, I'm not sure what their underlying animosity is. There's more to it there.
Yeah.
And then we get to the very end of the episode, and Martian is trying to burn his tail. I thought it was a little cheesy that they're like, oh, he got rid of tracker number 1, but did he get rid of tracker number 2? But then apparently he knows they were there. So maybe he didn't care if he was being tracked. I'm not sure what that whole thing is, but he does make his getaway, ends up meeting Sammy at this hotel. They go upstairs. They make love. Love is Blindness is playing on the soundtrack. He's confident that she's not in the game, although they warn him maybe she is. We're seeing all these different things intercut. And then, of course, we have that corny dialogue. The only thing that really bummed me, that I bumped against here in the series was the whole, you know what they say about love? That it's all you need? No, it's blind. So I'm like, okay, all right. Love is blind as I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we get to the end of the episode. I thought this was like an incredible, dense, and interesting world that they're building here. I was intrigued the whole way. I've heard people, once again, some of the reviews that came in, that it's so boring. I'm like, so boring? I mean, I don't understand that at all.
If you're looking for something action-packed, that does happen in the second episode.
In the second episode, yeah, exactly.
The first episode, it was laying a lot of groundwork. So I could see people finding it a little bit slow at times. There's nothing I love more than watching people talk. So for me, it was perfect.
Yeah. And maybe to follow up on what you just mentioned, I remember sometimes we have discussed Apple TV shows here that always have this 2-episode premiere, and you had only seen one episode. We weren't aware that both were available. And I do want to mention that if you are waiting for action, episode 2, if you weren't aware that it's out there already, episode 2 is thrilling and has a lot of very cool action in it. So if you've only seen episode 1, remember that episode 2 is out there, and you will get action and suspense as well. So, and then make up your mind as far as how you want to stick with the show or not. A couple more things. I already teased this, but we find out that Henry's brother is undercover. We find out exactly where he's stationed. We don't know what his mission is, but we know where he's stationed within the beginning of episode 2. His brother-in-law. I don't know if I said brother. I meant brother-in-law. And he drops this mission named Felix, which he hears brought up of one of the possible missions that Coyote might know information about. For some reason, and we're still unclear of this, the word Felix, or the code name Felix, perks up Henry's ears. He intentionally drops this because he wants to hear if there's any kind of leaks. It does eventually come back in episode 2, but we still don't know what this Felix mission is. I'm sure that will be explained in much more detail. Here we have supposedly a very good relationship between Henry, we would assume, and his wife. And of course, there's also this brother-in-law who is in the game, as they say, as well. I also like this detail that we see Daniela going for a run. Also, this is all in this montage at the very end of the episode. And she's screaming out all these like Iranian slurs.
Yes.
Because she's been listening to that tape that was given to her, and she is training herself on these words as well. Yes. And people occasionally, they look at her like, what's up with that lady? But most people are not paying attention. I guess if they knew what she was saying, it would be worse. But since most people don't speak Farsi, it's probably okay. Yeah, and I think there'll be much more, even in episode 2, where we see this mentor relationship. He is indeed going to be designated as her mentor on her mission by the end of episode 2. So that's all to come throughout the season. All right, episode 2 is called Wooden Duck. Henry's brother is on a mission in the Ukraine. He works for the World Medical Relief, and we see that these workers are basically signaling to each other that Coyote, not that Coyote's been arrested, but that there's something going on with the mission, and they need to be wary that they might be pulled out at any moment. And there's this 3-finger salute, which apparently stands for Ukraine Forever Free, something that he doesn't know. He needs somebody to explain it to him, which I find interesting considering that he should be briefed on that, I think, if he's undercover there. But maybe, if he's just playing aid worker, that he better for him not to know. We see Grandma and Grandpa, as I mentioned earlier, in front of the hotel that night. They see Sammy at one point. They're like, do you think she's a prostitute? They're like, no, she's dressed too fine for that. Do you think that's who he's here to see? But she does disappear in the middle of the night, importantly. Oh, but interestingly, in their night together, like kind of after they've made love, she mentions, this is actually something I wanted to circle back with you on. She mentions that in her home country, she could be killed for infidelity. I thought that was interesting, not only some cultural aspect I wouldn't have considered, but maybe that's part of the attraction between the two of them. If he does indeed trust her, and maybe he doesn't trust her as much as he thought he did at first, but if he does indeed trust her, he might see that she's in some ways paralleling him because she needs to operate in the shadows and she has a lot at stake. And maybe that's what is part of the attraction, that she's also a double agent to an extent, right?
Right. That's true. If Mustafa really exists.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's a cover story there. Maybe even if he does, he might be an agent as well, for all we know.
True.
Like the Americans. He does the whole thing again where I know you're watching me. He shows up to see those 2 agents, the ones that escorted him at the beginning of the first episode. He gives them coffee. He gives them pastries, which they say are very good. He hands them the trackers. When he gets back home, he burns the receipt, as I mentioned before. And then, of course, you mentioned Dr. Blake shows up. This is Harriet Smith, who is one of those people, just a recognizable face, who from Frasier and from many other things as well. Most recently, I was trying to, that's what I was trying to remember where I'd seen her before. I saw her very entertainingly in Werewolf by Night. This is a Marvel movie that they made for Disney Plus only, a very entertaining Halloween special. Anyway, she was one of the bad guys in that. Very fun. And we see that, the Coyote's assets, the ones that have been informed of his disappearance, one of them is like spinning out, and Martian is like, we need to exfiltrate. Yeah, we need to exfiltrate this guy. And at first people are saying, oh, do you think he's that compromised that he could risk the mission, that we can't leave him where he is? And he actually says, no, he thinks that they can use him in some way. And we'll see what that is by the end of the episode. I do like when the Dr. Blake is being shown around the office by this junior analyst and is saying, well, you haven't been in the field before. And the doctor's kind of saying, yeah, I understand. I know what the protocols are. And he goes, but this is for real. He goes, you don't get executed for treason unless you're in this type of role. She goes, no one's been executed for treason since the Civil War. I also like that Henry mentions to Martian that he might have post-mission disorder. And Martian goes, what is that, a Joy Division album?
Yes.
So he's got jokes. He's got jokes about his circumstances.
Very generation-specific joke.
Yes, very much so. Joy Division obviously is like a progenitor to a lot of extents for the Smiths.
Sure.
In The Killer, if you've seen that, the entire soundtrack is nonstop Smith songs. It's like every single Smith song that you've ever heard before, like 20 or 30 of them. He listens to the Smiths all the time on his iPod. Not Joy Division, though. I liked very much the first time that Martian spends time in the room with the doctor.
Yes.
And she goes, trust me, after a couple of days, I'm just here to observe. After a couple of days, you'll forget I'm even here. And he goes, considering what we do, that sounds terrifying. That's a very good point. They tell Daniela that she's going to be heading out to Iraq via Israel. They ask her if she's ever traveled there before, ask her what her cover story is when she goes to the safe house inside of London. She says, well, I told my friends that I'm quitting my job. Me and my boyfriend, who doesn't exist, by the way, I'm just going to be a wifey to him. It's interesting that, she seems so proud of herself, even though she kind of smirks during this lie she tells her friend earlier on when they're playing pool. Find it funny that she's so excited for this. And then when she sees all her actual ID, like all her that have her actual name on it, are all being shredded, there's this look of terror on her face when she realizes it's for real. Like, my identity is going to be erased now, which, of course, this is where it gets real. Another great scene here is when Martian uses Dr. Blake immediately to get the exfiltration that he wants, which I thought was so cool because you see how his mind is working. He intentionally sets up an antagonistic relationship with her, being like, I don't like having her here. And then immediately uses her as an asset because, if you think like he doesn't even like having her here, and then he plays that video for her, and then her read on it is like, he's about to break, we need to get him out. And of course, that accelerates this whole thing, convincing Henry to get him out. It really tells you a lot about how Martian operates.
Again, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but sure. I understand that maybe the Richard Gere character doesn't get along with, I don't know, whoever's dictating the budget, but $50,000 does not seem like a lot of money to me in this day and age, considering what is at stake here.
I literally wrote that down. I said, could be averting a national disaster, and they have a $50,000 budget, and he's haggling over the last few thousand.
Yeah. I mean, I understand making the decision based on like, is this substantively a good idea? But saying like, oh, we don't have the money, we don't have the $50,000 to do this thing that needs to be done. Right. I don't quite get it, but all right.
I once again think this is like a commentary on how this works. It's not only that he's like saying, do you understand like what it's going to be to me? Once again, it's like a workplace situation. What this is going to do to me if I ask for this extra $50,000. They're going to come down on me about that because it's just this bureaucracy and penny pinching. But the reason I think that's so important is that's like one scene after he meets with Henry outside of his office, because no one trusts that they're not being bugged at all times, I assume. They're having coffee, and he, like, under his voice is saying, why did you mention Felix? And he's like, I don't know anything about Felix. I just dropped it out there. And he goes, well, now someone's coming back to me about it. And he goes, right. That's why I wanted to know if there was any kind of leak, if that information would come full circle again. So Henry's fishing expedition has paid off. The Richard Gere character says to him, I don't even know what Felix is about. And he goes, if I don't know what it is, this is heavy, heavy shit. And the reason I mentioned that is because that literally comes in between the scene where, I mentioned before, and the one you brought up where they're haggling about the $50,000. And Richard Gere is like saying, this could be really, really serious, but I can't give you $50,000 to get this guy out. It seems like they're really focusing on the wrong things here monetarily. And this is where there's a lot of suspense in all of this. I like the behind the scenes stuff. I like the actual action, the shootout that occurs. But this is where the clock starts ticking and the plot accelerates here in the action as well. We have this person they're trying to exfiltrate. His last name is Orakov, and he has booked a flight to JFK, but his connecting flight is not in the Soviet Union or Soviet-controlled areas. They want to redirect him through Poland, which is where his family's from. I thought that was a very cool scene where Martian's trying to think on his feet. How do we direct him where we can have him close enough where they can get there quickly, but then also be able to come up with some kind of cover story for his exfiltration. He hears that his family is in Poland. Okay, that's where we're going. They use some cover story that his brother's cancer has recurred. They tell his brother to pretend he's sick again. And all these things, all these plates are being spun at the same time. And I knew this right away, by the way. When you see him, the Russian driver with the tattoo on his hand, which is like such an obvious idea that this might be part of the Russian mob. Of course, it's not. It turns out this is all part of their own operation. We even see by the end of it that this shipping container that he's been trapped in, that he probably assumes he's still in Poland, is actually there on the grounds where they're at in London itself, down in the basement, where they're beating this guy up and trying to see if he'll crack. And at first they think he has cracked, right? They think he's actually giving away information.
Yes.
The episode, by the way, the name of the episode is Wooden Duck, because the idea is if you squeeze a wooden duck, it doesn't quack. But if it quacks, then that's a problem. And then you have to call off everything. And they're waiting to see if he slips up, proactively just cancel the mission that Henry's brother-in-law is on. Those guys are trying to escape simultaneously, and they're trying to see, do we have to pull all the agents out? Is that going to be the situation? And this is where Michael Fassbender goes down there and goes, I'm going to take over this interrogation myself. He starts beating him and calling out names and going, is this person an agent? Is this person an agent? And at first it sounds like he actually is. It's true that they, so this is all happening in parallel action, that we think that it is indeed, he's starting to leak names, but it's not, right? These are all characters from War and Peace, right? And he is just calling out Russian names. And the fact that he's just saying yes and no to these people, he's not actually talking, right? He's just giving fake information to give the captor something. So it turns out he has not been compromised.
But also, is Poland that close to London?
I assume it is, because I'm making an assumption.
It's a 16-hour drive. I didn't do the flight. It's a 16-hour drive. I don't know. I was kind of surprised logistically how this worked.
I assume it's not. This is based purely on Day of the Jackal. There is an agent in that series that I'm currently watching, which also covers all the same geography, by the way.
All right, 2 hours and 10 minutes to fly.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. In that show, the agent has to get back that night for parent-teacher night. And she's like, I can make it. And she had to fly to Poland, talk to her contact and fly back. And she misses the parent-teacher night. But I'm like saying like, well, it must be doable because she did it in just a round trip didn't seem to take that long. So
yeah, maybe, that's commercial air too, 2 hours and 10 minutes. And it might be one of those where I don't know which way the tailwind goes. Maybe you can cut it in half. I don't know.
Right. You don't know how long they're taxing for.
Right.
Or if they have a private jet, like you mentioned, you might be able to. And by the way, in Day of the Jackal, it is also just going through the airport and taking a regular flight. He even says it here, right, to Dr. Blake, we can still make the last flight back if we leave right now.
Yeah.
So once again, it means that they actually have to get tickets to get on that plane.
But sorry, not the point. Just something that distracted me.
Oh, but you did circle back on something that I want to mention, which I did love that scene where he is in Poland with Dr. Blake. They were going somewhere else. He's just under observation. He ends up dragging her along with him. And last minute flight has got to be pretty expensive. And now he's brought someone with her. So they're not so worried about that for some reason. But, whatever her ticket cost, the $2,000 or $3,000 would have made the $50,000 budget or closed that gap on that budget, just that one ticket. But I did like that it allows that whole interaction to occur and says, here, back me up on this. And she says, never do that to me again. And he's like, hey, I just want to train you, which apparently he claims to be training all these different people. Maybe at some point he does see himself that way. He's saying, oh, you know what? That sucked for you, right? To have to lie about your identity and make up something on your feet for a few seconds. Well, I have to do that all the time for years at a time. Right. So just think about that, doctor. I also like while he's being interrogated that they are saying, oh, who's your boss? Is it the boss? Are you born in the USA?
Oh my gosh. So many.
Are you born to run?
Yeah.
And then Blair starts singing Dancing in the Dark. It's like, okay, right. I don't know if Bruce Springsteen's going to get a bump from this show, but it's very funny that everybody gets a Bruce Springsteen in the world. By the way, very different when you see, if you have been watching Day of the Jackal, anybody out there, just the choices of Joe Wright, obviously shooting this. I love the way the interrogation scene was shot. Some very clever camera movement. The Fassbender character is on the microphone. I should have known, by the way, that they were right there in the same building, because I was really surprised that as he's feeding them the question to ask, they start asking it almost immediately. I'm like, this can't be in Poland that this is happening, right? This has got to be much closer. It's like instantaneous interaction with them. But it turns out, yes, they're right in the same building. I really liked the way that was shot, and you see Fassbender and you see what's happening on the screen as if like he is doing it. Of course, he eventually puts the mask on, the baklava, and heads downstairs and it just says, I'm going to cut out the middleman. I'm going to do this myself. And all of that is happening while this shootout is happening, right? This is a very exciting shootout when they're trying to escape from Belarus. The brother-in-law and the other guys who are with him are trying to cross the border. They just shoot their way out of it. And it was like really thrilling. And then also the whole way that he falls back and gets behind them and takes over the machine gun and ends up machine gunning all these guys. I actually thought when he was sitting there like proudly finished, I'm like, oh my God, he's going to get shot in the head like in the last beat of the episode. But no, he survives, at least temporarily. And of course, the very last thing we see here in the episode, once again, paralleling Daniela and Martian, something that's definitely going to probably continue to happen. We see that Daniela's mission is that she's going to show up at this convention. She needs to get into this geophysics program. She needs to become such an impressive student that this Iranian professor takes her under his wing and gets her back to Iran. And of course, they call it, she has a copper bottomed ship in that point, rather than like coming up through the streets or something and having to fake some other identity. You come in within this, within the bubble of this like academic persona that she's created. And she's like, how do I get accepted to this program? How do I become a good student? And they're like, that's up to you. She goes, what if I don't do it? They're like, well, you quit your job and then get out of here. Right. Like that's the mission. Yeah. And it just kind of speaks to the fact that you are really out there on your own. Mm-hmm. And I like the fact that the handler here, once again, is Naomi, same as Martian's handler. And she says, well, that's the price you're going to have to pay. You have to be alone forever. Mm-hmm. Which, once again, I asked the question, you see Daniela has her whole life ahead of her to a large extent. Who makes this choice? I mean, I guess we don't know enough about her personal biography, but it seems to be, you have to be a very specific type of person to want to play act so much as somebody else, and not to be an actor, by the way, who does this, right? And maybe there's a metaphor there between spies and actors. Definitely is as well in Day of the Jackal, another theme that's between these two shows. But, you were saying it's like some kind of a personality defect.
Yeah.
How could you dislike your current circumstance so much that you would do this? Another theory I have when we were watching Day of the Jackal, maybe it's like being an athlete and just saying like, well, I can do this, right? It's just like level of difficulty, right? It's just like kind of challenging yourself. Do you think that might be an aspect to these people's personalities?
I think it could be. And I think there's also something probably patriotic about it to them. I mean, I personally am not a super patriotic person, but I think for people that are, that choose to serve their country, right? The Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, like people willingly sign up for these very dangerous things in service to their country, possibly also because they have a personality disorder. But right. Some people are extremely patriotic. And so I would think that might be a component of it as well.
Yeah, I remember after 9/11 that there was a This American Life episode where they were interviewing all these really young guys who had gone to join the military. And for some reason, people probably think that the military in general are like these gung-ho, jacked up guys who are looking for thrills. And there definitely is a large segment of the population that is like that. And that's kind of what they revealed in these profiles. Half the guys, more or less, seem to be like, I'm here for the thrills. I want to shoot guns, the thrills of it, which of course it isn't that way, actually, right? There's that definition of war is long stretches of tedium punctuated by short episodes of pure terror. But to your point, there is another group of these same guys, and they felt like this is a mission that they're on, and they want to help these people. And it's very much a Boy Scout type mentality, right? So there probably is an aspect of both of those, maybe even in the same person, to have this type of role. And kind of following up on all of that, we see also this interior voice. Actually, it's not an interior voice, right? He's actually being interviewed. We hear the Fassbender character, Martian's explanation of these voices that in your mind, you always have these voices that you're listening to. And the quietest one, there's always this quiet voice that tells you that you can do anything if you just try hard enough. And that is this voice of hope. And he says, if you ever, and this is maybe the punctuation mark on all of this, he says, if you ever feel that, if you feel that hope, then it's too late. And of course, very importantly, we don't know who he's talking to at this moment, but he has a bruise under his eye, and he's mentioning Sammy, that he's saying, I should have, as soon as I found out that Sammy wasn't there, she wasn't at that program, she wasn't at that meeting, he's had a background check done on her, and he's following up on it. He's trying to run into her at the conference, checking up on her. And he says now, in this later moment, I guess we're going to jump ahead to this at some point in the show, that he should have warned Henry immediately. So we know this is all going to go bad with the Sammy character. We don't know exactly what it is. It's going to be some part of his downfall. Like I mentioned, he's got a bruise under his eye, and he's in a hospital gown getting monitored for something. So something terribly bad has happened. Sammy is somehow linked to the cause. And he said, yeah, as soon as I had hope in my mind that this thing was going to work out, I should have pulled the plug. And that's the teaser basically at the end of this episode for the rest of the season of TV. So Where do you think this is headed in any way? Do you have any theories at this point?
We've discussed before. I'm one to more go along for the ride than
Sure.
try and figure it out ahead of time. So for me, I don't have any particular theories, but I do like how they've set several different things into motion and shown already the interconnectedness of them, right? Because I think sometimes there are several plot points happening, which they don't reveal the interconnectedness of them until like halfway through the season, which is fine too. That can be a nice surprise. But I feel like this is refreshing that I already understand that these are interwoven in some way. I'm interested to see how these characters develop. I hope we see more of the brother-in-law. I find him really interesting. I am wondering, do you think everyone will survive this season?
I don't know. That's a good question. I do agree that the brother-in-law probably will be a bigger part of this. It's just an interesting way that, for example, if Henry has endangered his life and the wife finds out about it, it's an interesting way to see another aspect of Henry. But more importantly, I think that if he was just going to be some kind of sacrificial lamb, they would have killed him off right away.
No, they have the opportunity. That's
exactly,
for sure.
Exactly. And I really thought that's where it was going to go with that.
I thought so too. Yeah.
That's the end of this character. Like that's the only reason he's been here. But they brought him back. They're going to keep him around.
Right.
So there's more to be had there for sure. Maybe the thing I'm looking forward to the most is not really knowing more about whether Sammy is a femme fatale or not. I have a feeling we can't know that too early in the show, or else it kind of blows the structure of the series. I'm more curious about this mentoring relationship with this young woman, which probably reminds him to some extent of his daughter, and how he's, trying to probably give her some tough love and some tough lessons, but being concerned about her, and whether that becomes a potential weakness as well. But also, I really like in general the idea of seeing an agent at the beginning of their career. And like you said before, the slippery slope and all the compromises you have to make to stay in that role, and cutting yourself off and thinking, I can handle this, but can you handle this? And can you truly erase the person you were before? And I really find that really interesting. I do like to see someone who's basically hollowed out at the end of their career, but I'm more interested in seeing that the progression from an innocent to someone who has basically lost all hope, which maybe you never lose all hope, because that's kind of what he's saying there. But maybe he should have lost all hope, because he's saying that is the end of the line. That's when it's all over, people. If you still
there's an expression, right? I don't know where it originated from. Hope dies last.
Right.
So, I think it's just human to always think, well, maybe.
Yeah, this might work out. But once again, I think that is maybe, if there's any kind of cultural commentary here, I mentioned before that we're putting our security in the hands of people who are A, daredevils, B, only self-interested, C, double agents, D, just have the same limitations that any other human being has, regardless of what kind of training they get. So all these possible risks there. And to that point, what if they're delusional as well? Like he's just like, well, I hoped it was going to work out. So I put the national security on the line because I thought she had a kind heart. I'm like, probably not the way we should be making decisions. But maybe that is, once again, the theme here, or one of the themes of this show. All right. And Sona, as far as on the podcast, later this week, I have rewatched episode 1 and 2 of Severance. I've also started watching 3. I haven't gotten to episode 3 yet, but I'll be republishing our conversation, Sona, episodes 1 and 2, and some new observations I might have made on my rewatch. And that'll be coming at the end of the week. Before then, I'll also be discussing The Day of the Jackal, episode 8, with Darren, one of our listeners from Australia, by the way, Sona, who's now become a regular contributor as well.
Love that.
And then, of course, Sona, we will touch base again and discuss episode 3. Only one episode, so this conversation should be shorter. And so next Friday, we get the next episode, and we'll record at some point over the weekend.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Thanks again. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.